We are live. Excited to be with you all on this Thursday. I've been getting a lot of comments and questions and just people reaching out. I didn't know you had a podcast, or I love what you guys do. So I just want you to know we all appreciate that. This is for you, right? So any love and support we appreciate, but also, there are people out there who want this information, right? Parents who have kids that are struggling, or if you know my mother at all, she has her own struggles, and so when she listens to us, she has said, it helps me understand myself. So this is great even for adults, right? Because kids who have struggles are just adults that have struggles. Okay, so we're all kind of in this world together with our own little struggles, and if you have a kid, or maybe you yourself have struggled, or your neighbor has struggled, this is for you. So this is really for everybody. But we're going to be talking about ADHD. There's a lot of confusion about ADHD. There's a lot of misunderstanding about ADHD. It can sometimes be a convoluted conversation, depending on what we know and what the research is showing. And so, a lot of parents are confused, and so we want to touch on this topic. This is part 2. So if you missed part 1, go back last week, excuse me, and watch that episode. But Heather wanted to talk about some new research and some epigenetic factors with that. So I think that's a great jumping on point. And then I want to talk about a little bit what I've been seeing the past few days, few weeks in the clinic as far as some symptoms. But let's jump into that. So Heather, as we were kind of getting ready to jump on, you mentioned that you kind of want to talk about some of this newer research and some of the epigenetic findings and stuff like that. So I'm going to kind of hand it over to you, and I'm going to be a participant in what you have to share with us. Always learning.
Yes. Yeah. The more you know, the more you don't know. But just to back it up for a second, epigenetics is the environmental influence on our gene expression. So we have this DNA genes that help sort of, who are we, that we get from our parents.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to know that is just a blueprint awaiting instruction from the environment.
Yes.
And for the longest time, ADHD was believed to be like there is this weaker part of the brain or that weaker part of the brain. We know that it is very much about brain connectivity. Think about anything you do in life. It requires multiple skills working together in tempo and harmony together. And so that's important to note. But I want to clarify, there are some myths that ADHD is because of bad parenting, lack of discipline, that sugar causes ADHD, things like that. That is not the case. But there is very consistent research that food additives, some of the unhealthy lifestyle, the ready in a second food that we have now can exacerbate it. I mean, if it's kind of like with heart disease. Heart disease can run in your family. It doesn't mean that you can guarantee that you won't have heart issues, but you can greatly decrease the risk by exercising, eating right. One of the strongest things that we can do to help ADHD symptoms is to take omega-3. That has been coming out stronger and stronger. We've known that, but how compelling the research has gone next level. And so many of the things we talk about all the time with sleep and diet and exercise, I mean, that actually stimulates brain development. It's not just getting rid of stress. We know that adversity can definitely exacerbate the symptoms. A lot of things that have happened with the pandemic have revealed struggles that kids already had that were underlying the surface. And then that trigger just brought it on full steam. So, I mean, there's a lot we could say, but I wanted to clarify a couple of things about that. It's not so much about this brain region is just different. No, it's epigenetic expression, and it's about all these things working together. It is very much seen as an issue with regulation, regulating attention, what to attend to, regulating emotions, etc. So,
100%. Yeah. One of the things. Are you familiar with Bruce Lipton? Have you read any of his books or anything?
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah, I like some of what he says, but because he does talk a little bit about how our belief system and how we view the world, impacts actual genetic expression, right? And so, if you're right around the time when I was going through high school, they were still talking about how, you inherited this from your genes. Kind of like you're doomed to the same success that your parents had. So if they had a heart attack or stroke or heart issues or cancer or any of that other stuff, you were kind of doomed to that, right? And I remember when Angelina Jolie kind of found out she had the genes that predisposed her for cancer, and she had surgery and everything. And now we're finding out that you may have some predisposition with some genes, but lifestyle plays a massive role in that, right? And so it's kind of like when you're building a house, right? You can have an outline, a blueprint, right? But the material you have determines how well constructed that house is. You can have the best laid blueprints, but if you don't have good material, good, all that stuff, the house will fall, right? So very excellent point. Just quick question. Do you know like how impactful I don't have any recollection off the top of my head of how impactful they think epigenetics is, like as far as like a percentage wise, like, do you know?
Oh, I mean, they're just fine. We know epigenetics impacts all these things, but the research, this is in the past few years, there's been so much more. So I haven't read where this accounts for blah, blah, blah percentage like you can with some things. But for example, I have read things that where if you pay attention to the omega-3 supplementation, it has a 2 to 3 greater times impact on symptoms than decreasing screen time. And that's hard for me to say because we need to limit that. But with that, we know that exercise is enormous for that growth and development. And when we talk about regulation with ADHD, like so many times people the first thing you think of is emotional, but that's also impulse control.
Yes.
Like hitting a brake pedal and being able to think through it. We don't just want to treat symptoms. We want to take care of underlying issues, stimulate brain connectivity, get all the parts of the brain, front, back, left, right, communicating. But just understanding that regulation is, this stuff's more enticing, but I can regulate myself and stay the course and hone in on what I'm supposed to do. It's impulse control. I want to jump up and do that thing, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'm going to listen to the other person talk. All of those things are regulation. But this really new framework for it, it's not brand new, but I'm saying it doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion, really helps combine all the pieces of what it was originally thought. It was really originally thought as hyperkinetic disorder, which is the hyperactivity. So many times that hyperactivity is not physical. It can be, but it also can be emotional, mental hyperarousal, having a hamster wheel going. And that, it's thought, oh, there's attention involved. Well, attention depends on working memory. It depends on other executive functions. Part of executive function is regulation. But I love this framework that sort of takes all the pieces that we've known to be true, and really the summary of it is that it's an issue of regulation. I put up a post the other day about emotional regulation begins in the brain. And the ADHD brain, this would apply to a lot of neurodiverse conditions. They often have difficulty separating what's really not a big deal in the big scheme of things from the big stuff. But that's also, Brian and I talk all the time about knowing details, but also putting them into context. That gives you perspective. Those are things that are impacted. If they struggle with working memory, that mental sketch pad of juggling short-term, long-term data to solve a task or a problem, if that sketch pad gets taken up with big emotions, I don't have room to be organized or to solve that problem. They all play off each other. Yep. So it's very important to look at this from a very holistic, point of view.
I love that. I mean, I think that's really the only way you can truly solve any of it, right? Like it's never, or rarely, right? Is it ever just one thing? It's the whole of it, the summation of all the parts coming in, environment, genetics, all of that, and understanding that it's not just hyperactivity, right? It can be, thought process or regulation of all that stuff, right? And so that's so important. One of the funny things is, and I don't know if this happens to you, but when I'm listening to somebody, my brain starts running down all the pathways of what it could be, right? Like and so it takes a lot of brain power sometimes for me to like actually sit and listen. Not because I'm not interested in them, but just the fact that my brain's already like got a problem that it wants to solve real quick, right? It's like, boom. So I have to step back and consciously sometimes just be in the moment, and that takes regulation, right? Some of the smartest kids I know who in my office are the kids where you can say something and their brain is trying to solve that problem instantly and they can't come back, right? Like they can't come back to original thought. They have to like keep pressing on, like, do this and this and this and this. You're like, kid, you are so smart, but you can't stop the thought process. It's just like a train that keeps going. So there's a lot to that. But
sorry. I was going to say another way regulation plays out that may not be evident is there is such a strong link between ADHD and fine motor problems, handwriting, and written expression. That is not a coincidence. Dr. Robert Sylvester, who's a former professor of education at the University of Oregon, wrote beautifully in his research about how much regulation is required for handwriting and written expression. Mm-hmm. I mean, the precision that you have to have. A lot of times kids are called lazy. They just don't care. They have a bad attitude about it. But it takes regulation to take your time and form the letters properly and make sure you have all the punctuation and the spelling. You have to remember think about how many processes are involved in that. Remember what I wrote in the previous paragraph and relate it to what I'm writing here. That's working memory. You have to have vocabulary and language and all of that. But it's also important to pay attention to, just because they have struggles and get distractible, that doesn't mean it's ADHD. There are so many different types of attention. There's so many different sources of those issues. So is it just with auditory information? It might be auditory processing. Visual perception issues often get confused for ADHD. Although regulation is also tied to controlling your eye movement. So that they can be a team, they can be confused with one another. That's where that logging we talk about always comes in. There's so many things that can mimic it, even slow processing. And there's so much advancement happening right now. It was for a period of time called slow cognitive tempo. And then the researcher who coined that term is like, that sounds a little negative. And so he's coming up with other terms for that as we speak, kind of. But sometimes kids have delayed processing. And so it looks like they're spacing out or something, or daydreaming. And really, their brain just needs extra time to get there. Mm-hmm. And then if that can be treated so the wrong way. And then you wonder, why are these things not helping?
Okay. First of all, I love what you're talking about there, because I have lots of kids where you can speak a sentence or two to them. And if you're patient enough, they're processing it, right? But you have some people who are just spitting stuff at them and they're like, okay, all right. So it's important. A lot of my kids, I want to give them single sentences and see how quickly they process it. And then this is just while I'm doing the exam, because I want to know how they process information, right? So I give them simple commands, verbal commands, and I let them process it. I try not to overwhelm them with it, but it gives me an idea. I see kids and they're sitting there, okay, right foot forward. And they're literally thinking out, trying to do it. Other kids, they can do it like this, but some kids are processing it. The second thing I want to talk about, and this is, I've seen quite a bit of this recently. Don't know if I'm looking for more, if I'm just attracting it more, who knows. But when we talk about attention, okay, so when I mentioned just a few minutes ago about me paying attention while somebody's speaking to me, probably the largest influencer of that is sleep. Okay, how well am I actually sleeping? Now, if you're a parent and you have 2 kids, 5 or younger, you know that at some point in time, you're probably going to be woken up in the middle of the night. Okay, this guy. And if they're sleeping right next to you and they're kicking you in the face, you get woken up multiple times a night. But I have kids who snore. And so they're not actually, they have, I'm not going to call it sleep apnea, but they have a kind of sort of a variation, pediatric version of that, where they're not getting enough oxygen to their brain. So they may be in bed for 9 hours or whatever the recommendation that you're following, but they're not waking up rested. Their brains are literally starved for oxygen. It's, what does the brain need? Oxygen, food, and movement, right? And so they're missing a third of that. And so, like Heather was saying, there's lots that can go into this, right? And so that's one of the big ones I've seen. If your kids are mouth breathers at night, or you notice they're snoring, having their airway evaluated may be a good choice for you, because I've had probably about 6 or 7 kids in the past month and a half that have come in with that. So
yeah, pay attention on that too. Does your child look like they have a narrow mouth?
Yes.
And like a long face? Sometimes the palate expansion hasn't happened that gives me the space I need to take that oxygen in. I talked to an ENT some time ago. He heard me speak at a seminar, and he said, "You just answered a question I've had my whole career." And he is a well-renowned surgeon, very successful, awesome at what he does. And he said, I've been wondering, like, I thought, well, of course this child has anxiety, or this teen. I mean, their adenoids are the size of softballs, and I took out their tonsils adenoids.
Done.
Why do you still have anxiety? And he said it wasn't until he was listening to my talking. He's like, oh, well, the time they had those impacted the oxygen to the brain, and then that impacted brain development. And that's one reason, exercise and having good core strength that sends oxygen, blood flow, glucose from the cerebellum to our prefrontal cortex, where we have all of those critical thinking, executive function skills, such as regulation, which is the impulse control, emotions, cognitive flexibility, working memory, organization, time management, all of those things that we think about.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm one of those people. Okay, so there's a couple different reasons why, but my resting blood oxygen is about 96. Okay, which is not good, people. Okay, I actually have to sit there and meditate and actually breathe to drive it up. But if you just grab me at any point in time during my my work day, it's about 96 or 95. And part of that has to do with a bunch of stuff I don't want to get into, but it does affect my attention, right? It affects, and me being, I know in the picture Heather and I are the same size, but overall in real life, I'm not a really small guy. I'm kind of a bigger guy. So, I do snore. There's some precautions I have to make or to do to make sure I don't snore, make sure my airway is clear. But it plays a massive role in attention and focus. Now, when I was in my 20s and I didn't know a lot of the stuff that I know now, I mean, what do you think my go-to was? Lots of caffeine, right? I got something to stir the pot. So I love what Heather brought up. Adenoids being removed, tonsils, those are clear indicators that there's probably that you're a mouth breather and there's probably airway issue. Okay, that's what those are meant to do. They're meant to catch germs in the air or pollutants in the air, right? So they're doing their job, but ultimately there's a real problem going on that we need to solve. But if you've always been somebody you never wake up rested, damn, I tell you what, of the dads I see, I would bet 30 to 40% don't wake up well rested. And I look and their oxygen's low, all sorts of stuff. We could go, this is a rabbit trail, or a rabbit hole. I'm not trying to go down too far, but it plays such an important role. And I think it's not a well understood problem out there right now. But
yeah.
All right.
Can I say one more thing about sleep since
Absolutely.
you're talking about that? Because I think this is really pertinent. I mean, we've talked before about how the spinal galant primitive reflex can impact sleep or a racing brain or restless body. The restless body, there are more causes of that than just ADHD. So I want to say that. But one of the biggest benefits of sleep, besides the obvious things that we need for growth and development, is it is during sleep that our brain defrags. You know how you've had a day and stuff is just all over the place. Think about when you study for a test, maybe you glance over the things the night before, your subconscious mind is working on it, that information, so you're ready for the exam the next day. But think about if you're seeing chaos and disorder, disorganization in life, that usually means chaos and disorganization in the brain. It is during sleep that our brain defrags, just like we do on our computer, and it processes faster. I take this, okay, how do these go together? And then my brain puts it into organized file cabinets. Now I no longer have a pinball machine ding, 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 ding going off in my head. So when kids miss sleep, they wake up with that pinball machine still going on because their office didn't get organized during the night. I don't hear that talked about enough as a benefit of sleep, and it's huge.
So I'm the one promoting this book. I don't know if Heather's ever read it, but this is me, okay? And I tagged in the comments. It's Why We Sleep by Matthew Parker, I believe is his name, or something like that. Renowned sleep. But he talks about it. Just what Heather said, almost verbatim in essence, is what he said. And so it's a fantastic book. I loved it. It really helped me as a doctor, though, appreciate sleep. Like, that's not something I learned a lot about in school, right? We're bones and muscles and nervous system. Yes, all that's, but sleep is not something they talked about a whole lot about. And he goes into depth about the importance of it, and just how routine and all that stuff plays such a fundamental role in brain health, but all of that which Heather was talking about. And I can't remember if it was this book or another book, but yeah, there's even mention of like PTSD, right? If a soldier or somebody doesn't encounter sleep immediately after trauma, like the evening after trauma, it's more likely the risk of PTSD and some of the the major symptoms revolving around that goes up significantly. And because that's what the brain does, it fragments down, breaks everything up. Believe it or not, I didn't know this until I read the book. I don't know why, but your brain looks at things from an emotionless standpoint. There's no emotion involved during sleep. It solves problems with no emotion. Okay, it's just a logical machine that figures it out. And so when we don't get sleep and we encounter emotional struggles or problems or difficulties, whatever they may be, our brain doesn't have a chance to look over it, process it, and break it down for us. So when I read that, I was like, this is so amazing what our brain does and how important sleep is. So I love what Heather said. That's my book recommendation. But do you have one, Heather? Just off, since I'm asking.
No, I do, but I don't have them on my head right now.
That's okay. Heather has so many books. To narrow down to one would be, I mean, every time I talk to Heather, she's reading a different book. She's read different articles. I mean, that's a hard thing to do sometimes. That's just one of my favorites. It was very impactful for me personally. That's why it's one of my favorites. But
I do want to say, talking about books, this would be more geared toward kids, but if you want to check out my page, just a few days, it was like last Friday, I talked about how, Brian and I talk all the time about how kids learn and adults learn through stories. And a lot of times these kids who are struggling with regulation, attention, different things like this might also read reluctantly. We don't want to label them as that, but it is not just by them knowing people or us hearing our stories of things we struggle with so that they don't feel like they're on an island by themselves. Reading stories, I have a list of books on there that feature neurodiverse characters. Some have ADHD, some have dyslexia. That can get really engaged reading going because it is going to be personally relevant. They are going to have a character that they relate to, and a lot of those even have book series attached to them. But if you want to work on literacy, this also grows social emotional skills, empathy, so many things, and practice literacy. I highly recommend looking at books, have them pick one out that are regarding neurodiverse characters. And I love that in these books, they're talking about the strengths that these characters have, as well as things that don't come as easily, and for them to understand that it makes us human to have combination of strengths and struggles. And then, especially if you pick book series, kids already have a familiarity. It becomes a friend. And then they want to read the next book and the next book. And they also have, because they have familiarity, comprehension, they understand the story better. And then they enjoy reading more and they get good at it. So I highly recommend that as far as books go.
You said the recommendations was last Friday at the
last Friday. It's just a few posts ago on my page. It has a stack of books on it. It has a bunch of book titles, and all of those feature neurodiverse characters that students enjoy reading.
Okay, so make sure you do that. Go like that post. Make sure you take a look at that. I love that idea because in reality, Heather and I talk about this all the time, but we relate to stories no matter who we are. That's why we love movies and books and all sorts of stuff. That's what we love. Our brains love stories, but kids love stories that they relate to, right? Or they love to know stories about people they love or characters they love, right? Superheroes are a big thing, right? But they also love stories about you. Okay, and so I love what Heather said. Anytime you can get a story that a kid connects with, there we go. Words, use your words, Brian. They want to know more, and that's partly how we learn, right? My kids follow me around and they learn things. That's what they're looking for. That's part of why they seek our attention. They're following our characteristics and what we do and how we do it and why we do it, right? So they love you and they love characters in stories and books. So, anytime you can relate something in stories, that really connects with them. So I love that suggestion. Make sure you go like that post and follow those books. All right, so we're at the almost 25-minute mark. I don't have anything else on my plate to talk about today. Heather, you?
I don't. Just to reiterate, just because they're impulsive sometimes doesn't mean it's ADHD. When our emotional brain takes over, we get reactive. Just because there are so many emotional dysregulation doesn't mean ADHD, but it is important to know where it's coming from. And if they do have ADHD, that doesn't mean that's the whole story. There is such an extremely high comorbidity, meaning individuals with ADHD are much more likely to have other struggles as well. They also have tremendous strengths, but they might have different kinds of learning differences and things. So just because you find one doesn't mean, and just because they're anxious, and anxiety and ADHD often coexist, but often they get confused one for the other. If you're an adult out there listening, this diagnosis wasn't really recognized until 1986. If something's resonating with you, if you've been put on depression, anxiety meds, it's not helping, consider, just because you might have trouble with inattention, but not the hyperarousal part. I mean, just make sure that just because you find one yes on yes, this is something that's impacting me, that doesn't mean you're done. Roll in and out the combination of things going on so you can address the foundational causes.
Like Heather said in the beginning, the whole story, right? There's so much to this. I love that idea. In our office, we try to look at the whole person, right? Like they're not a symptom or they're not a diagnosis, they're a whole person, right? And so I know Heather does the same thing. We see a person, right? And we are all people, we all have struggles, but you are a person first, a symptom diagnosis second, right? And so we want to treat you as a person because we care about the people in our practices, right? That's why we do what we do. We care about you. And so I hope you all know that. Again, this is for you all. We hope this, if this resonates with you, please share it. We want to help as many people in our communities as we can, whether that's just listening to us or seeing us, whatever it may be. It doesn't matter to me. The point is to make impact and to help families and individuals understand themselves and their families and have better, stronger families. I think ultimately that's what we want within our communities. And so everybody loves Heather. She was at our 5-year anniversary party. Heard a lot of amazing things. I already knew she's amazing, but heard a lot of amazing things about her. My mom wants to be her best friend. Okay. All right. So she told me right after, I love Heather. So, everybody loves Heather, but Heather, somebody wants to, you put out such great information. How do they find you? Where do they find you?
At The Hidden Churn on Instagram or Facebook, or Brain Balance of Southlake, Mansfield, Katy, or the Woodlands.
All right. So make sure you go like those pages, follow her. Make sure you go like that post that she mentioned about the books. Also, Heather has a podcast Mondays at 2:00. They're always amazing. Do you have one this week?
We do. This has been a comedy of errors on Mondays for the past 2 weeks. Facebook was down, and then this Monday we had a very sick child that got in the way. So this Monday it's going to be the study skills. What is holding my child back academically? They're so smart, and what to do. Yeah.
Awesome. So technology gets in the way, Facebook gets in the way, lives. We all have this, right? So, but make sure you follow the pages when. Obviously, if something doesn't interfere, she has those amazing podcasts. Make sure you like those, share those, comment, ask questions. I know she appreciates that. If you need to get a hold of me, you can reach me at 972-387-4700. All right. It is ADHD Awareness Month. All right. So I don't know if we're going to continue this on. We've already had our year written out. So, but there's a lot that goes into this. So I think if we might have a part 3. I'm going to talk to Heather about this. I don't know what next week is, but I've been getting a lot of questions about it. And so if we need to dive further into ADHD, we will. All right. That's it. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
You too.
Bye.